I mean, first of all, thank you very much for joining us today again for our latest webinar. It is much appreciated. Just to go through who we have on the call today, or what I'm going to be doing. So I'm going to brief introduction, then I'm going to do some housekeeping that we normally have. Sorry for those that attend regularly. We've got some slides that will do the positioning of this Qlik Data Query, and then most of the time will be taken up by Alex doing the demonstration. So who have we got on the call? So you've got myself, sector manager at Ometis. You've got Sharon, who many of you will know as your account manager, and Alex, our operations director, who will be doing most of the talking today. So basic housekeeping. We are going to record the session again, so it will be released on YouTube over the next few days. I will send another note out with a link to it if you want to share it with people who weren't able to attend. Please ask questions whilst we're going along. I need to change this slide because what we've actually done is introduce the new Q&A function in Teams. So you will see a button for Q&A. If you could use that to raise questions or make points during the session, they will come through to us, and if appropriate to interrupt at that stage, then I will do so. And then say during the Q&A bit afterwards, feel free to raise your hand if you wish, and we can get you in, unmute your microphone, and you can talk to us as well. So further ado, I shall hand over to Alex Walker, who will take you through Qlik Data Query.
Good morning, all. Let me just switch over to me presenting the PowerPoint so that I don't have to have Neil as a glamorous assistant. Great. Okay, so today we're talking about a relatively recent new bit of functionality in Qlik Sense, around direct query, but we'll set a bit of context first, then I'll do a demo, and I'll kind of come back and summarize some of the use cases and considerations for that. So broadly speaking, Qlik has these three technologies to cover big data. The challenges of big data typically with Qlik is that you've got, if you try and load it all into memory, it's either going to be quite slow or you're going to need massive compute power and whatever. And if you've already got that stored somewhere, you want to leverage that compute. So we're talking about your cloud database, and cloud data warehouses. So your Snowflakes, your Google BigQueries, your Azure Synapses, and so on. And we'll go into some details around the technologies this supports in due course. So the three offerings that we often talk about with the big data within Qlik are dynamic views. This one's, I have to say, I've not seen this used a lot, but it is a capability that exists within the platform where you can have a single chart or an object that as you filter in the rest of the application, it will kind of send a query off, refresh that one chart with live data. The theory we're coming across with here is maybe you've got like a Twitter feed or something that's really live updating, but you want to make some filters and only show things with that trending topic or whatever, and that would update kind of live, but only one object, not the whole application. But the filters are kind of synchronized between the two. Then there's a bit of functionality called ODAG, which stands for On-Demand App Generation, which we'll actually demo a bit as part of kind of a follow-up to Direct Query in a bit. But essentially what this allows you to do is you have an aggregated app, or what gets called a selector app, that then passes some selections down to load the detail in from a different set for a more kind of in-memory explorative experience. But the most of what we're going to spend our time on today is Direct Query. That is the where we build a new type of app. So it looks quite similar in the front end. The way you build it is slightly different, but there's some very big familiarities there. But this actually pushes all of the compute down onto the underlying data platform. Okay, so there's no in-memory with Direct Query. It is purely push-down SQL, as they call it, to your data platform. So let's I'm going to say the same thing a few different times because I know this is quite a new concept for Qlik because we're so used to Qlik being an in-memory technology. So forgive a bit of repetition, but hopefully it helps explain it to clearly. So the direct query approach here is reusing that compute. So if you're an organization that already has, let's use Snowflake in this example, and you've commissioned some kind of dedicated capacity in Snowflake or some large warehouses that's already doing a whole load of number crunching for you for certain purposes, you can reuse that. You can leverage that investment and get Qlik to act as the display layer on top of that effectively with some really clever ways of kind of, integrating and giving that Qlik-like experience that you're used to. Obviously, I've mentioned big data a lot there. You can have like an ad hoc experience for billions of rows of data. This is not a technology you'd typically use if you're counting things in the millions. There could be use cases for that, but we're talking about kind of billions or even trillions of rows of data here, which your data platforms will support. They're architected for that. But loading that into memory in a Qlik Sense application is probably going to be, too much or just not the right thing to do because maybe you don't need all that data at the same time. So here we're extracting the metadata. So Qlik will understand the fields, field names, the data types, and so on, and allow display of those. But you're not importing the entirety of the data set. Data recency, so this is another key use case. Any data pipeline, the more components in it you have, typically, the bigger lag there is from the source change into getting that into your target application. So this allows you, if you've got some very fresh data in your data warehouse or your data storage platform, you can view that very quickly in Qlik Sense. Again, especially if you pair those two things together, big data and data recency, needing that kind of near real-time experience, but across a very big data set that you don't want to have to kind of transform and load fully into memory. So that's an advantage. And finally, again, some people will have that very complicated set of security rules that they've already implemented, some governance and some access control at, let's say Snowflake layer, and this will leverage that using some of the single sign-on technology, which you'll briefly see a couple of times during the demo. That means you don't then have to re-implement that, in Qlik Sense and come up with an approach for self-service around that. So those are kind of the key strengths, or key reasons you might look at direct query. Putting it a little bit in context here, again, a bit of repetition here, but you might use direct query here for what's called light analytics, where you don't need advanced visualizations, you don't need full search capabilities, you just need some basic kind of show me some data type applications with some basic visualizations on top of it, where you're doing it ad hoc, perhaps not standardized, a bit of self-service going on there. Then you look at kind of what we might call hybrid analytics, which is sort of the use case we're going to look at today, where you say, well, actually, we need something aggregated with some ability to drill down before we then kind of jump into a more analytics mode within in-memory application. So that's where we'll look at pairing together direct query with on-demand app generation. And then finally, kind of what we're more used to in the Qlik world is this kind of in-memory analytics. So it's fully extracted from the underlying data platform here into an in-memory application. Okay, so this kind of covers direct query. Is more on the left-hand side in the middle of this diagram. One key thing here I will mention, and I think I've alluded to it already, is that the direct query pushdown will not and will never deliver equivalent functionality or performance to it being in memory. It's a different capability, so you need to measure, whether it's the right technology, the right approach for different use cases, so we'll experience some of those limitations as we go through. So without further ado, let me jump across into my cloud platform. This is our cloud platform, the very familiar Qlik Sense offering. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a direct query application over some, demo Salesforce data, Snowflake data, sorry, customers and orders and so on like that. And I'll show you that experience and then build an on-demand app off the back of it. So normally the way we would approach this, is to go and create a new analytics app, And the first thing we'd do is go and grab a whole load of data to pull through and download that. Perhaps we'd do that into some QVDs and then load it through a transform layer into the front end. But in this case, we're going to follow the same first steps, but we're then going to do something slightly different. So as I come through in here, I get to create my new blank application. Always takes longer when you're doing it on a demo. I don't know why that it made me wonder if it was going to do something strange there. Okay, and we get this interface that we're all very used to. I'm going to go to Files and Other Sources, and I'm going to select my Snowflake connection. Okay, so my OAuth token has expired. So this is part of what I've talked about here around the single sign-on. We've got single sign-on set up here. So this is going to authenticate as my user. My token has expired. So I just need to go to edit the credentials, re-authenticate. Some of you might be used to this kind of screen with Qlik Web Connectors or some of the other web data sources. And you can control the expiry of this, but that's logged me in. You notice there, we're integrated with Azure AD. So that's authenticating me through using my Snowflake connector. And now I can see the data in Snowflake. If you're familiar with Snowflake, you might know they have these demo data sets. I think this is about one is like 150,000 customers, 10 is 1.5 million, this is 15 million customers, and this is like a billion customers or something like that. So these are some large data sets. I'm going to go it's for the medium size one, just for the sake of having some quick turnaround of results and so on. So and this is the approach that you'd normally take. You go in here, you'd select your fields and say, what do you want to do? And then you'd load that through. That might take a long time if you're loading, 100 million rows of data and so on. And what we're trying to do here is avoid that. So we actually have to go to a slightly different interface, which I have to say is a little bit hidden away up on the right-hand side here. It'd be nice if there was a little prompt in the middle that said, oh, you could use direct query for this. But it's at the moment, it's hidden on these three dots up at the top right alongside the edit credentials. So I'm going to tell it I want to go into direct query mode. And this applies across the whole application. So this then becomes a direct query application. So we see the same or a very similar interface here. I'm going to go for SF100. And in this case, I'm just going to start off with customers and orders. Okay, I can preview the data in here as well. So this is going live as the other connection interface is. I'm doing a preview of the data that is in these tables in Snowflake. You can see it's all just demo data that we've got here with some very weird randomized comments on there. So similar process to before, to building an in-memory app. It will now bring you to a screen where you model your data. It's a little bit more structured here. Because what we're doing here is defining not only how these tables associate together as you would in the in-memory world, but also what type of join you might want to use. Because behind the scenes, when we run a query, when we create a visualization, it's going to create a query that is going to run on Snowflake, and you have to tell it how you want it to do that for you. So I'm going to add a relationship between these two. Obviously, this is really nice, clean data, so it's quite easy to do these links. In the real world, this could be more complicated. But you have these three options across the top, what tables you want to link, but in the middle, what type of join you'd like to do. Okay, so you might say we want an outer join here, because you might say, well, a customer might exist but not have an order, but we still want to see that customer in our list in this scenario. And again, nice clean keys in this data. So we know that we've got the customer key in both tables that we can link on. So we create that. And then we can apply the changes. Now note, there is no reload button in here because there's nothing to reload. There's no, well, I guess the only thing it could reload would be the metadata about the tables if they might have changed. But I have no reload data button here because it's going to do everything on the fly, passing that data through to Snowflake behind the scenes. Okay, so I've got a very basic data model here. If I go into the data model viewer, it looks very similar. So again, even though we've not loaded it into memory, it's modeling it like this for us. So we've got our orders and customers table, and it's built this field here to associate that. You'll notice you don't have the preview here that you'd normally have with an in-memory app. But I can go to the sheet. He says I can go to the sheet. will let me go to the sheet. Perfect. Live demo breakdown. Can I go to the sheet? Let me see what happens if I come out of that. Wow, I've got 5 new sheets for some reason in here. Thank you very much. Maybe it was working in the background and I was just too impatient for it to load up. Okay, so let's go into one of our sheets. One thing you might notice is there's a subset of objects available on the left here. It's not quite as long a list as you get with a regular application. You notice at the top here it says it's a direct query app. So it is a special type of app with a similar structure, and you can, there are a lot of similarities, but just as a reminder, it's not got a data load script. It's doing these queries live. So that's very, very, very high level stuff. Let's just create ourselves some KPIs. This all feels fairly familiar, hopefully. So let's have a look at customers, and we'll do a count of customers. So we've got 15 million customers in this scenario. And if we do another KPI next to it, and then let's do our orders. No, not the order key, this one. We'll do a count of that as well. Okay, so we've got 150 million customers that we're dealing with in this scenario. Now, that feels very familiar, but again, to reiterate, there's nothing in memory here. What it's done is it's passed those queries back to Snowflake. So let's go and have a quick look in Snowflake. I'll just sign into my Snowflake environment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the activity for my account going on behind the scenes here. So if we look here, and I think I can filter this down to, that doesn't matter anyway, but we can see that these ones here, so there's a bunch of, in fact, there's quite a lot here, because as I built it, I had to run queries to preview the table. But if I have a quick look at this, again, those of you that know a bit of SQL, you don't have to write this or understand this. This is just what's going on behind the scenes. But we can see in here that this is the bit of code that's doing the count of the order key from this table. And it's doing an order by and a limit, but it doesn't really need to do that. But that's sort of like how it's so it's auto constructing the SQL for us to be run, and then it's displaying the results to us. So the hard work here is being done by Snowflake. So that's the orders one, and then if we look in here, that's the customers one. Okay, so that's a pretty boring at the moment, but I'm gonna add another object type in here. Let's just add a table in here just so we can see a little bit more granularity on the data. So let's add in some details about our customer. So let's do our customer name. And then from our orders, let's put in our order date. So note that takes a little bit longer than you'd expect if it was in memory. So again, that's now run a query on Snowflake to get us a list of customers to populate in this table. Now we know there's 15 million customers. What it's not done is gone and extract the entire list of 15 million customers. It's gone and got, in fact, we'll be able to see it in the query, the top, I think it's the top 1,000 by default. Let's go back to just refresh that. There we go. In fact, it's limited by 19 because presumably there's 19 on display here. Okay, so it knows how much is on display. It's only going to go and get the ones that it needs. So yeah, let's whack in order date in here. So this is the first time we're using data from 2 different tables. Okay, so because of how we specified the joins, we said it's an outer join we want, but there is a good linkage between these 2 tables in this scenario, so that should be okay. But again, this is obviously going to take longer because Snowflake now has to go off and do a whole load of joins to go and get the date for every customer's orders. And again, we can have a look at that in the back end as it's running in Snowflake. So in fact, we can see that's running. So we had something that ran for 17 seconds there, and there's another part of that that is still running, that was running for 8 seconds, but it looks like this part's finished sufficiently for us. Okay, so we've got the order date, the customer name in there, and we can have the some other aspects added as well. Let's go and add some. I'm just going to add a couple of filter panes because they're useful to show some of the differences that we have with direct query. Okay, so we're going to add a couple of filter panes. I'm going to add the order priority, and the order status to these. So you will notice, well, the observant people will notice a couple of things I'm going to highlight here. One is that these look quite different. These don't look like your normal filter panes. These have tick boxes next to them instead of that kind of green, white, and grey type experience we're used to seeing. So this just allows us to select one or more values from here. But we don't have that kind of menu at the top to say, select alternative. There's no search here. There's actually, again, the most observant ones of you will notice there's no search at all in a direct query app. Okay, so it needs to be structured in such a way that you can drill down into the data that you need using whatever kind of higher level filters you've got or groupings that you've got available. Okay, but as I said, you can say I want to filter here and I want to look at urgent orders with a priority or status of P. Let's say that's pending orders with an urgent priority. Don't know why these are pending from 1995. I'm guessing it's just a very old demo data set here. Okay, let's go and add some more data in from some different fields because we want to really get down to a granular level here. So I'm going to go back into my data model manager and select to add some data. Need to make sure I'm using the same database, the same schema here, but I want to add in line item. Let's do region and nation as well because they might be useful. I'm adding line item in here less because I want to actually use it in this app, but it becomes part of the demo later on. It's a nice, useful thing to have as we go through for the on-demand app generation, because typically here you might not choose to use the most granular table, you might be using the higher level, but equally, if you're going to aggregate some of that, you could put it in here. So we're doing that. We're now back to this interface again to create our relationships. So I'll just do this really quickly. Our orders is an inner join with a line item based on the order key. So I've just seen a question come up. Yes, there is. So the question is there any caching in Qlik of this? Yes, there is some caching. So there's obviously it's holding a little bit in memory as to the results. I think Snowflake also does some caching. So if you run the same query again in very quick succession, you'll get a much quicker response. So there's sort of like a couple of layers of caching there, which arguably could lead to some confusion. But obviously it leads to better performance as well. So let's do customer to region. I meant nation. And yeah, and then we're going to do finally region and nation. Okay, so now we've got our sort of data model lined up here. If I apply those changes, come through into data model viewer, we'll see if it lets us go to the sheets after this in a minute. Okay, so again, we've just sort of built that up, and it looks very similar. And these are hidden fields, these keys now, to say that's how the association works between the tables. So we've now got additional data in there. So let's add some of those fields in. Let's do a count of line number so you can see how big this data set is to see how we why we might have a use case for this. I don't think we actually have a key on this table, do we? So let's just do a count of line number. Okay, so we've got 600 million rows order lines in this data set. And you can see that was super quick because Snowflake's really good. We didn't have to load 600 million lines of data in. It's just able to do a count of that really quickly. I'm also going to then add in no, I'm not going to add that into the middle actually. So yeah, but then we can do some things. So some of these charts are obviously supported, and we can add things like bar charts, and we can say that we want to look at the region. This is a very sanitized data set, so it's all very evenly spread out. So if we add in the region name in here, and we look at something like the price, the total price, we'll see that it's actually very evenly distributed across the different regions. So again, this is running a query on Snowflake. And as you can see, it happens to be incredibly even, and there's about 4 and a bit trillion of revenue spread incredibly evenly across all of these regions. That's what you get from a randomly but balanced data set generation. Okay, so that's a direct query application, and you might think, well, it looks like a very basic Qlik Sense application, and I'm not presenting the graphical goodness of Qlik Sense super well here. But why might you do this? You might say, well, that's great. I've got 600 million lines of data here, but I really want to be able to go and explore them. And that is where I'm going to show on-demand app generation off the back of this. First, I'm going to make some filters though. So as an example, when you're building an on-demand app generation using this as a to make a template, you want to specify some default filters. So I'll go back to my example of saying, well, let's have urgent orders that are pending. So we're already drilling our lines down to, let's see, 3.5 million, and let's just look at Europe. We might even want to go even further than this. So again, this is all updating. So we're below a million lines of data now. And just to show that caching thing that we were asked about, if I untick this, you see that's instant then to go back. And if I go back again, that's instant. So there's obviously some caching going on there to allow that performance when you're moving through selections that have already happened. I don't actually know whether that's shared between users or that's just a per user thing. I'm guessing it's per user because it's obviously using my credentials in this case, so you couldn't necessarily share that in the same way you could with an in-memory application caching. So it might be that another user running a similar query wouldn't get that, although that may be looked after by Snowflake with their performance optimizations. How are we doing for time? Right, okay, I shall move on. So yeah, let's have a look at this as an example. So we've got a region selected, we've got a priority and an order status selected. What you can do is use that to generate a template app. So we'll stick with the default name for now. This is going to be now a template app is that kind of so once you have a selector, so that would make this the selector, you then have like a template which is then used to give you that in-memory application experience. So I'll just quickly show this because it's a really nice way of having a quick start at an on-demand app. This brings you straight into the when it doesn't work. Why has that not worked? It says no fields with selections. Script can't be generated. There are fields with selections. It would be a really nice way to generate an app. Let's try that again. And what it should do is it should read those fields that I've got selections on. Okay, let me look at one I've created earlier. We'll look at the one I made yesterday when it was working for me. Isn't it? This one, I think. So what it did for me yesterday, when I was obviously preparing this, is it generates this code for us. It looks really complicated, and it probably doesn't need to be this complicated, but it's belt and braces making sure it's all working through. So in this case, what it's done is it's specified some default filters that it puts into variables here. The way that ODAG works is it kind of passes variables from one app to the other app. So here we've got urgent ones, we've got order status P. In this case, I'd filtered on a manufacturer, which comes from the parts data. And then it says, okay, load into memory from these data sources, with these variables as part of the parameters. So where that plus that equals naught, or these, and it's got a whole load of belt and braces stuff in there that, but you can kind of see where it's saying, okay, where, and this is filtering on the manufacturer, and this is filtering on the manufacturer as well, and so on and so forth, where it's doing all of those joins and loading the data in. And the nice thing then is, here's one I made earlier to kind of cheat a little bit on this one. But as you can see here, we've got the same data, slightly different KPIs this time because I've got this one slightly differently. We've got all of our customers, but we are now in an in-memory application. So let me show you that experience kind of a bit more end to end as I was going to. So if I go to my Direct Query app, I find the right one. 10. It wasn't actually my 10th attempt. I was just naming it clearly. So if I come into this one, this is my direct query one. You can see that at the top there. Again, this was on a slightly smaller data set. This was on like the 15 million order one, not the 150 million order one, but still plenty of revenue. But what I can do is I can select open orders, let's say, low priority ones this time, just for the sake of argument. And you notice down the bottom here, I have these two icons. This is the on-demand app length. And that little pie chart shows me how close I am to being allowed to generate this. So I've set a threshold when I created this link to say you've got to get below, I can't remember whether it's 100,000 orders or something like that. So if I come in here and filter, let's filter on a customer, that should get me well within the limits. I've only got 2 orders and so on. I can now come down here. I made a couple of iterations of this one and I can generate a new app. That's the one that I generated yesterday. That's why it's got that date timestamp on it. And it will keep that. Again, I can set the expiry for that. It's going to keep that for a day. So actually, it's probably about to get deleted in the next little while. And no, I don't know why these always show up as slightly before midnight on the 31st of December, year 1, until they've actually generated, in which case they get a valid time. So this is what this is doing, is that's actually going and using that template app, this one over here, and generating a new copy of that, running that reload script with the filters that I've specified here, extracting that data from Snowflake, and then we'll make a new copy of that app for me to work with, which may or may not persist. And we can go and have a look in Snowflake at that, doing that behind the scenes. So it looks like there's nothing running there. That ran. Let's just have a look whilst we rather than waiting for that. Again, so here you're constrained by the speed you can get the data out of Snowflake or into Qlik Sense and load it in. Let's have a look at an example I did before. This might be very similar to the one that we've just seen. So yeah, this is filtered on a different manufacturer. If you notice, this one's manufacturer 2, this one's manufacturer 3. So it is a different data set. So I can then generate an on-demand application from using the Direct Query app as my selector. Apologies for that, all went a little bit awry there in the middle. But let's go back to some slides, and I'll go back through the use cases we've talked about here, and start to wrap things up and do some Q&A. Okay, so key considerations here. Again, I think I've mentioned all of these, but just to run through them again, performance-wise, you're reliant on your underlying database. If you expect a tiny warehouse or whatever, the super extra small warehouse in Snowflake or whatever, then you're going to end up with slower performance. If you're, but that might save you some cost. The security comes from the underlying database. So whatever is used in the connection details, in this case, we've used single sign-on, but if you'd specified a single account, then that security would flow through to the end user. It's not the full associative experience. You don't get that kind of green, white, and grey, so you're not seeing what's missing in the same way, although to some extent with your joins, you can control a bit of that visibility. There are slightly different capabilities depending on the platform you're using, so that's worth being aware of, the underlying platform that is. There is a maximum of 1 million rows per query, but you probably shouldn't be querying more than that if what you're trying to do is aggregate and be highly efficient. You can't combine it with other data sources, so you've got to live all within that one platform. So you can't say, well, I've loaded this from Snowflake. Can I now add in this Excel file? Can I write some script in there? No, you can't. It is just purely querying that database. Again, you can do that by using on-demand app generation afterwards and pair it up down the line, but it is a standalone kind of direct query application. There's no global or field search, there's no calculated dimensions, there's no impact analysis, you can't use extensions, and there's a limited subset of visualizations that you get in there, which might sound like quite a lot of limitations, but it is for one kind of niche use case that we're looking at here, which are the big data. And it needs to be big data that's already clean. You don't want to be trying to load messy data in here. You don't have any transform capabilities, okay? But it could be that you've got a nice clean data mart that's come out of Qlik Data Integration, whether that's the on-prem or the brand new cloud data integration offering that they've got. That's really clean. The field names are nice. Users can understand it, and you've got some nice links that, like we had in the data there. Perhaps you've got some real-time data where your database is constantly updating, and you want your dashboard to be right up to the minute with everything, with all the data. or you need aggregated data, but that changes regularly. Typically with a Qlik Sense app, yeah, you might have an extract to transform and a front end, but but actually processing that and aggregating that is quite time consuming, especially if you're doing it across the full data set every time. And if you've got regular changes in there through the day, that can become an onerous process. So, but Snowflake or whatever platform might be able to process that for you more quickly, especially if you're aggregating it up. And here, using it as a selector app, as we use for on-demand app generation. Okay, it can be easier than loading all that data, pre-aggregating it, and then building a new app. You can just use this as a way of querying that. Okay, so hopefully that's giving you an idea of where where we pitch direct query. I appreciate I run a little long. We should have said that. We're flexible with our half hours up to about 45 minutes. Yes, Neil, have you been monitoring the questions? Have you got any that you want to go for?
I have. So the questions, you've answered all the ones that have been asked during the meeting. I have got one or two that were sent in advance from people who aren't able to attend. So I've got Paul. What is the cost? Of course, everybody always wants to know that. Well, I think I can jump in with that one, I think, which is that on Qlik Sense SaaS, this is included within the cost of your subscription. Obviously, there will be some costs as you're pushing down into Snowflake or whichever other tool that you use. And in fact, that comes on to another question that I got from Jane, which says, which applications are supported. Now, I know that Snowflake is, clearly you've shown that now this morning. I think Databricks is as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's just those two at the moment.
Right.
I imagine that offering is going to expand, but I think what's clear is that, well, first off, this is a Qlik SaaS offering only. I don't know if that's one of the questions that's coming. It's not coming to on-prem as far as we're aware. And I don't think they're going to be adding capabilities for this to, general, databases and things like that. I'm not saying they won't. They might do, but the key thing here is it's big data. It's going to be the cloud platforms where people have got kind of compute commissioned for it already. So yeah, so I do expect, whether it's BigQuery or Synapse and things like that, the kind of the main ones that they're looking at with the cloud data platforms.
Yep. Okay. And then, of course, the question we get asked a lot, and how long is a piece of string? How big is big data? Over to you, Alex.
Well, yeah. How long is a piece of string? Well, to some extent, that's going to, depends on what you're comparing it with. But, I think, as I said in the introduction, if you're counting things in millions of rows of data, kind of at your transaction level, you're probably not talking capital B, capital D data, big data. Once you get to those billions of rows, that can get really tricky to architect something in a Qlik application that is going to be both performant and detailed enough and recent enough to be useful. So that's typically how I think about it. But again, that might, if you're using Qlik on-prem at the moment on a server that only has 8 gig of RAM or something like that, then for you big data might be 10 million rows because it might struggle with that. And this might be a good reason to look at, well, SaaS, obviously Qlik has their limits in SaaS by default, 5 gig in memory. So sort of once you reach that point, you might draw that as a threshold. So I don't think there's not one answer to that question, but it's mostly the threshold at which you start experiencing issues with the size of your data in loading into memory or the timeliness of that data flowing through. It's how I would say that.
Great stuff. All right, thank you. And I haven't had any more questions. So does anybody else have any from the floor that they'd like us to turn the microphone off and turn the microphone on and ask away during the meeting? Silence. All right. Well, lastly for me, I guess, thanks ever so much as ever for attending. We do appreciate you supporting these events. As I always say at the end of these things, if you've got other topics that you would like us to cover, then please do get in touch, and if we can, then we will. The next one coming up is, in fact, I've got to send out some information about it later, so yeah, keep an eye out for that one coming out soon. But Okay, thanks very much again for everybody for attending, and we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you very much.